Imagine standing at the edge of everything. You've travelled for 9 years covering 4 billion miles at 50,000 miles per hour. Behind you, the sun has shriveled into a tiny cold spark, hardly bigger than the stars around it. You were told this place was a graveyard, a frozen footnote, a piece of debris we threw away in 2006 because it didn't fit our definitions. But as the darkness pulls back, you realise we didn't just demote a planet, we exiled a king. And while we were looking the other way, this dead rock was doing something impossible. It was breathing, it was bleeding, it was keeping secrets that shouldn't exist in a place this cold. We thought we knew what was waiting for us at the end of the map. We were wrong. Pluto is not what we thought it was. And something very strange is happening. The story of Pluto begins with a betrayal. For 76 years, it was a household name. It was the underdog of the solar system, the ninth child, the tiny world that could. But in the summer of 2006, inside a crowded hall in Prague, a group of humans decided that Pluto no longer belonged. They called it a dwarf. They described it as a piece of dead, floating debris lost in the freezing dark. They essentially erased it from the planetary dictionary, moving it from the category of world to the category of leftover. We told ourselves that out there, 4 billion miles from the sun's warmth, nothing could possibly be happening. We imagined a silent, cratered rock, a fossilized relic of the solar system's birth, as inert and lifeless as a tombstone. We were comfortable with that definition. A dead world is easy to ignore. But while we were busy arguing over its name, a small machine the size of a piano was screaming through the void, heading directly for the exile. When NASA's New Horizons finally pierced the veil in 2015, what it sent back didn't just surprise us, it terrified the scientific community. It caused what researchers now call category panic, because the world we saw through the lens of that camera shouldn't have existed. According to every textbook we had written, a world as small and as distant as Pluto should have been geologically dead for billions of years. It should have been a scarred, battered ball of ice, riddled with the impact craters of 1 billion ancient asteroids. Instead, we found a world that looked younger than Earth in places. We found a world with a smooth, beating heart, mountains that float like icebergs, and a sky that glows with a ghostly, alien blue. This is the central mystery of the exiled king. Why is he still alive? On Earth, we have a massive molten core and a sun that provides constant energy. Pluto has neither. It lives in a permanent freezing twilight where the sunlight is hundreds of times dimmer than a cloudy afternoon on Earth. If you were standing on its surface at noon, the sky would be pitch black. At minus 390 degrees Fahrenheit, physics starts to break. Ordinary water ice doesn't act like ice. It becomes as hard as solid steel, forming jagged, razor-sharp peaks that tower 11,000 feet into the dark. On Pluto, rock is irrelevant. The very ground you would stand on is made of frozen gases that would be invisible air on Earth. And yet, this world is not a fossil. It is a slow, alien machine that is still doing things in the present tense. The first image that changed everything was the heart, formerly known as Sputnik Planitia. This giant pale anomaly shines in the dark across Pluto's equator. At first glance, the media called it a cosmic message of love. But when the scientists looked closer, they saw something unsettling. This wasn't just a pretty shape, it was a massive 1,000-mile-wide basin that appeared to be completely devoid of craters. In the outer solar system, where space rocks are constantly screaming through the dark, having no craters is like having no wrinkles on a billion-year-old face. It means the surface is being erased. It means something is churning underneath, constantly resurfacing the planet, swallowing impact scars, and dragging them down into the depths. This discovery shattered the cold start theory, the idea that Pluto was born as a cold lump of ice that stayed frozen forever. Instead, we are now forced to consider the hot start paradox. This theory suggests that Pluto was born in a violent, energetic burst of heat, and it has spent the last 4 billion years acting like an insulated pressure vessel, desperately clinging to that ancient warmth. It's a world that refused the thermal death script we wrote for it. It is as if the universe is telling us that our definitions of what makes a planet alive are provincial and small. We assumed that because it was far away, it must be simple. We assumed that because it was small, it must be quiet. But the silence of Pluto is a deception. The deeper we look into the data from that 2015 flyby, the more we realize that Pluto is not just a planet. It's the antagonist to our scientific understanding. It is a world of red snow made of complex organic compounds called tholins, falling from the sky like a slow eternal rain. It's a world where the atmosphere doesn't just sit there, it behaves like a weird laboratory, using photochemical smog to regulate its own temperature in ways that defy our best climate models. Every time we answer one question about Pluto, 3 more mysteries take its place. Why does the heart-shaped basin sit exactly where it does? Why are the mountains floating? And most importantly, what is happening deep beneath that frozen crust that is keeping this world from turning into a solid block of ice? Some believe there is a pitch-black underground ocean hiding in the dark, a liquid abyss kept warm by the pressure of the ice above, and a trace of radioactive heat from below. If that's true, it means that at the darkest, coldest edge of our neighbourhood, there is liquid water. And wherever there is water, we have to ask the ultimate question: is something swimming in the dark? We took away its title. We called it a dwarf. We tried to relegate it to the shadows of our textbooks. But Pluto remains the undisputed ruler of the Kuiper Belt, a kingdom of glass mountains and toxic seas that doesn't need our validation. It has been there, dancing in the dark, for billions of years, and it will be there long after our own sun burns out. But as we began to look closer at the something strange happening on its surface, we realized that the mystery doesn't end with Pluto. In fact, Pluto was just the gateway. It was the first sign that the outer solar system is not the empty graveyard we thought it was. It is a frontier of active, ocean-bearing worlds, and Pluto is the one leading the charge back into our consciousness. The exiled king has returned, not with a plea for his title back, but with evidence that we don't understand the universe as well as we think we do. We are now forced to look at that giant, pale heart and admit that we were wrong. It isn't a symbol of love. It's a piece of evidence in a cosmic crime scene that we are only just beginning to investigate. And as we peel back the layers of nitrogen ice and red tholin dust, we are finding that the truth about Pluto behaves less like science and more like myth. It is a world that shouldn't be active, yet it is. It's a world that should be frozen solid, yet it flows. It is a world that we tried to forget, but now it's the only thing anyone can talk about. Because if Pluto is this strange, what else is waiting for us out there in the abyss? Imagine for a moment that you are a forensic investigator, and the crime scene you've been called to examine is 4 billion miles away. You arrive at a world that should be a graveyard of craters, a silent record of every asteroid that has ever screamed through the Kuiper Belt. But as you step onto the surface, you find something that makes your blood run cold. Right there, stretching across the equator, is a massive, pristine heart of white ice, and it's perfectly smooth. No scars, no impact marks, no history. It's as if someone, or something, has spent the last billion years erasing the evidence. You were told this was a dead world, but dead worlds don't hide their secrets. Dead worlds don't have a beating heart, and they certainly don't swallow everything they touch. We've spent decades looking at Pluto, but we never truly saw it, until now. To understand why Pluto is not what we thought it was, we have to look directly into the centre of its most famous feature, the giant, pale anomaly known as Sputnik Planitia. For years, the media called it a symbol of love, a beautiful heart on the edge of the solar system. But to a planetary scientist, this heart is a terrifying mystery. It is a massive, 1,000-mile-wide basin that appears to have no craters at all. In the violent shooting gallery of the outer solar system, a surface this smooth shouldn't be possible. It would be like finding a pristine, uncracked window in the middle of a war zone. This lack of craters is the first clue in our forensic investigation. It tells us that the surface of the heart is young, perhaps less than 10 million years old. On a world that is 4 billion years old, 10 million years is just a heartbeat. Something is actively resurfacing this planet, and that something is happening right now. When we look closer at this crime scene, we find that the heart is not made of rock or even normal water ice. It is a colossal glacier made of nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide, gases that would be air on Earth, but here they have frozen into a toxic, churning sea. But this glacier is not a static block of ice. Because of the faint radioactive heat still leaking from Pluto's core, this nitrogen is actually boiling. It's not boiling like water on a stove, but it is moving in a slow-motion convection cycle, churning like a pot of thick, freezing soup. This is why there are no craters. Every time an asteroid slams into this region, the toxic ocean of nitrogen simply swallows it whole, dragging the debris down into the depths and smoothing over the surface as if the impact never happened. It is a pristine white sea that consumes everything it touches. But here is where the mystery deepens and where the scientific community has split into two warring factions. For years, the leading theory was that this massive basin was created by a catastrophic impact, a giant rock hitting Pluto so hard it carved out a hole that was then filled by a rising subsurface ocean. According to this theory, the only way the heart could stay where it is, on Pluto's equator, is if there is something incredibly heavy underneath it acting as a counterweight. Scientists propose that a massive, pitch-black, underground ocean of liquid water is pushing up against the crust, held in place by the weight of the nitrogen above. If this is true, then Pluto is an insulated pressure vessel, a world born warm that is still desperately clinging to its ancient heat. However, in 2024, a new piece of evidence was introduced that could change everything we thought we knew about Pluto's heart. A simulation study proposed what is now known as the splat theory. Instead of a catastrophic, high-speed excavation that punched through to an underground ocean, this theory suggests that the heart was formed by a slow, oblique collision with a planetary body about 400 miles wide. Imagine a massive icy world moving relatively slowly, hitting Pluto at an angle, not a bang, but a splat. This impact would have been so slow that the core of the impacting object didn't sink. Instead, it stayed flattened against Pluto's surface, hidden beneath the nitrogen ice. This creates a massive narrative conflict. If the splat theory is correct, then the heart doesn't need an underground ocean to stay in place. The weight of the impacted material itself provides the counterweight that keeps Pluto from rolling over. This is a high-stakes scientific argument, because if the heart is just a splat, the argument for a subsurface ocean, the most exciting and terrifying part of the Pluto story, actually weakens. It turns Pluto from a world that might harbour life in its dark depths into a world that is simply a graveyard for a massive ancient collision. But even the splat theorists can't ignore the strangeness happening at the edges of this toxic sea. If you were to stand on the shores of Sputnik Planitia, you would see mountains that shouldn't exist. These peaks, like Wright Mons and Picard Mons, tower thousands of feet into the black sky, but they are not made of rock. On Pluto, water ice is so cold, minus 390 degrees Fahrenheit, that it behaves like solid steel. These mountains are essentially giant blocks of frozen water that are less dense than the heavy nitrogen ice of the heart. Because of this, these mountain ranges don't sit on the ground, they float. We are looking at a world where mountains the size of the Alps break off and drift across a plain of white poison like giant, slow-moving icebergs. The forensic evidence is clear. Pluto is not a fossil. Whether it's the boiling nitrogen, the splattered remains of an ancient sister world, or the hidden ocean of a hot start planet, something is keeping this world alive against all odds. It is a world that has refused the thermal death script we wrote for it in our textbooks. We called it a dwarf to make it seem small and manageable, but the reality is far more unsettling. The heart of Pluto is a churning, forensic puzzle that is still being written. It is a world that breaks our dictionaries and defies our physics. Every time we think we have solved the mystery of why the heart is smooth, we find a new detail, like the blood-red snow of tholins falling from the sky, that reminds us how little we actually know. This is the something strange that the original videos and textbooks missed. They tell you about the heart, but they don't tell you about the category panic it causes in the rooms where scientists actually work. They don't tell you that if the splat theory is true, we have to rethink the entire history of how worlds are born in the outer dark. We are looking at a world that was born warm, a world that kisses its moons, and a world that uses photochemical smog to control its own temperature. The deeper we go into the forensic file of Sputnik Planitia, the more we realize that Pluto is not just a rock at the end of the map. It is the beginning of a new map. It is the evidence that the outer solar system is full of active, strange worlds that we've ignored for far too long. We looked at a heart and saw love, but the closer we get, the more it looks like a warning. A warning that out there in the abyss, the rules are different, and the exiled king is just getting started. If you want to understand why something strange is happening on Pluto today, you have to look back at the very moment it was born. For nearly a century, we believed in a lie called the cold start theory. It was a simple, logical story that fit perfectly into our textbooks. We assumed that because Pluto was born 4 billion miles from the Sun, it must have begun its life as a frozen lump of ice and rock that slowly drifted together in the dark. We imagined it accreting piece by piece, never getting warm enough to melt, eventually settling into the inert, fossilized ball we expected to find. But in 2020, a landmark paper in Nature Geoscience detonated that theory forever. The data from New Horizons didn't just suggest Pluto was active, it suggested that we had the entire biography of the planet backward. Pluto didn't start cold, it started as a furnace in a freezer. This is the hot start paradox, and it is the key to unlocking why this world refuses to die. If Pluto had started cold, as we once believed, its subsurface ocean would have formed much later, as radioactive elements in its core slowly decayed and provided heat. But if that were the case, the surface of Pluto would show signs of contraction, massive global wrinkles caused by the ice settling. We don't see those. Instead, we see signs of expansion. We see a world that has been stretching and cracking from the inside out for billions of years. This realization changed everything. It means that Pluto was born violent. It means that, as it was forming, the energy of all those incoming rocks and ice was converted into intense heat, melting the planet from day one. Pluto was born with a liquid heart, and it has spent the last 4 billion years desperately trying to keep that heart from stopping. To understand how this is possible, you have to stop thinking of Pluto as a rock and start thinking of it as an insulated pressure vessel. This is a concept that the original documentaries and viral videos almost always miss. They talk about the ice as if it's just a surface, but in reality, the ice is a lid. Deep beneath the nitrogen glaciers and the water ice mountains, there is a layer of methane clathrates, a specialized type of ice that acts like a thick, cosmic thermal blanket. This layer is incredibly efficient at trapping heat. While the surface of Pluto is screaming at -390 degrees Fahrenheit, this internal insulation is keeping the interior warm. It's a planetary thermos holding on to the ghost of the heat from its birth. This hot start reframes every strange thing we see on the surface. Take Right Mons, that massive 90-mile wide structure that looks like a volcano. In the old cold start model, Right Mons was a mystery that shouldn't exist. How could a tiny frozen rock have enough energy to erupt? But in the hot start model, Right Mons makes perfect sense. It's an exhaust vent. It is evidence that the pressure vessel is working. If Pluto started hot and is still cooling down today, that heat has to go somewhere. It pushes liquid water and exotic slushes up through the crust, creating the ice volcanoes that terrified scientists when they first saw the images. Pluto isn't alive by accident. It's alive because it was born with a massive thermal inheritance that it is spending very, very slowly. On platforms like Reddit, this discovery caused a wave of what researchers call category panic. If a world as small and as distant as Pluto can preserve an ocean for 4 billion years, then our entire map of the solar system is wrong. We used to think the habitable zone, the place where life could exist, was a narrow ring around the sun. But the hot start paradox suggests that the habitable zone isn't a ring, it's a state of being. If you have enough insulation and a violent enough birth, any world, no matter how far into the abyss it drifts, can become a sanctuary for liquid water. This is the something strange that the experts are still grappling with. If Pluto is an insulated pressure vessel, it means that the darkness of the outer solar system isn't empty. It's full of hidden interiors. It suggests that worlds like Eris, Sedna, and Gong, objects even further out than Pluto, might also be carrying ancient, liquid oceans beneath their shells. We thought we were looking at a graveyard of frozen footnotes, but we might be looking at a neighborhood of hidden, liquid worlds. But there is a darker side to this paradox. If Pluto is cooling down, it means it is slowly, inevitably dying. Every eruption from Right Mons, every convective churn in the nitrogen heart of Sputnik Planitia is a bit of that ancient birth heat escaping into the void. The planet is in a state of terminal decline, but it is a decline that takes billions of years. This creates a haunting narrative of a world that is too alive for its age. We expected a corpse, but we found a patient in a high-tech hospital bed, kept alive by the very ice that was supposed to freeze it solid. The scientific community is now forced to ask, if the heat is still there, what is it doing to the chemistry of the hidden ocean? In the pitch-black depths, where the pressure is immense and the heat of the birth still lingers, complex organic molecules, the building blocks of life, are being cooked in a slow radioactive stew. This is why the something strange on Pluto is so unsettling. It's not just that the planet is active, it's that it has the perfect conditions to be a laboratory for biology in a place where biology should be impossible. We are looking at a world that broke the dictionary, not just by its size, but by its history. Pluto refused the thermal death script we wrote for it because it had a secret advantage. It never let go of its past. Every crack in the ice, every floating mountain, and every toxic eruption is a reminder that the exiled king is still holding on to the fire he was born with. We thought we were visiting a world that was finished, a story that had already been told. But the hot start paradox tells us that the story is still being written, and the most important chapters are happening deep underground, where our cameras can't see. As we move forward, we have to realize that our understanding of Pluto was built on a foundation of cold assumptions. We assumed distance meant death. We assumed small size meant silence. But Pluto has shown us that, in the outer dark, the rules of the game are different. It is an active, churning, insulated machine that has survived against all the odds of physics. And as we begin to look away from the solo planet and toward its massive partner, Charon, we find that this hot start didn't just affect Pluto. It shaped an entire system, leading to a cosmic relationship so strange that it challenges our very definition of what a moon is supposed to be. But to understand the partner, you first had to understand the engine, and the engine of Pluto is a fire that refuses to go out. Imagine standing on the frozen, dark plains of Pluto and looking up into the sky. On Earth, we are used to the moon being a traveller, a silver orb that rises in the east, crosses the heavens, and vanishes in the west. But on Pluto, the rules of the sky are broken. If you were standing in the right spot, you would see a massive, dark world hanging directly above you. It would be nearly half the size of the ground beneath your feet, filling the sky like a jagged, unblinking eye. And it would never move. It wouldn't rise, it wouldn't set, it would simply hover there, fixed in the same patch of blackness, watching you for eternity. This is Charon, and it is the first clue that the Pluto system is not a planet and a moon, but something far more intimate and far more unsettling. We were taught that Pluto was a lonely exile, but the truth is that it is locked in a permanent, haunting embrace with a partner that refuses to let go. This is a love story written in the cold language of orbital mechanics, and it began with a kiss that changed the history of the solar system. For years we treated Charon as just another moon, a satellite orbiting its master. But as new horizons drew closer, we realized that our definitions were once again inadequate. In every other planetary system we know, the moon orbits the planet because the planet is so much heavier. But Charon is so massive compared to Pluto that the center of their relationship isn't inside Pluto at all. Instead, they both orbit an empty point of space between them, a phantom barycenter that sits in the freezing vacuum of the void. They are two cosmic outcasts spinning around a ghost. This is why many scientists argue that Pluto and Charon are not a planet and a moon, but the solar system's only true double planet. They are co-equals, bound by a gravitational chain that is so tight they have become tidally locked to one another. On Earth, only the moon is locked. It always shows us the same face. But on Pluto, the lock is mutual. Pluto and Charon are forever staring into each other's eyes, unable to turn away, trapped in a dance where neither can lead and neither can follow. This permanent lock creates a strange reality for anyone standing on the surface. If you walk to the far side of Pluto, you will never see Charon. You could live your entire life in the red-stained snows of the hemisphere, facing away from the moon, and never even know it existed. But on the near side, Charon is a permanent fixture of the landscape, a massive, silent witness to everything that happens. This level of intimacy is rare in the universe, and it points to a history that is far more complex than a simple asteroid capture. The traditional story we were told was one of violence, that a massive object smashed into Pluto billions of years ago, blasting off a piece of its crust that eventually cooled into Charon. But in 2025, a new theory emerged that is far more poetic and far more scientifically compelling. Researchers call it the kiss and capture scenario. Instead of a catastrophic, bone-shattering impact, this theory suggests that Pluto and Charon were once two separate worlds travelling through the Kuiper Belt. They didn't collide at high speeds. Instead, they drifted toward each other in a slow, graceful approach. They kissed, a brief, oblique collision that didn't destroy them, but instead sapped their energy and tangled their fates. They spun together, touched, and then separated just enough to be caught in each other's gravity forever. They didn't break each other. They chose each other. This kiss explains the something strange that we see on both worlds today. Because they are so close and their relationship is so intense, they actually share an atmosphere. Pluto is constantly bleeding nitrogen and methane gas into the vacuum, but it doesn't all drift away into space. Some of it is caught by Charon's gravity, drifting across the gap like a spectral bridge. When this gas hits Charon's North Pole, it freezes instantly, creating a massive, dark red stain that scientists have nicknamed Mordor Macula. This isn't just a mountain or a crater, it's a biological-looking bruise, a red scar made of stolen material from Pluto that has been chemically cooked by ultraviolet light. They are two worlds sharing the same blood, two outcasts holding on to each other in the deepest, coldest ocean of our solar system. But the weirdness of this relationship doesn't stop with the central pair, because Pluto and Charon are dancing so wildly around that empty point in space. They have created a gravitational environment that is mechanically haunted. Dancing around this central binary are 4 tiny chaotic moons: Nix, Hydra, Kerberos, and Styx. These aren't normal moons. They don't have stable orbits, because the gravity of the double planet is constantly shifting as Pluto and Charon spin. These smaller moons are tossed around like ships in a storm. They don't just orbit, they tumble. They spin unpredictably through the dark, flipping over and over as they move. If you were standing on the moon Nix, the sun might rise in the north one day and the west the next. Even the concept of a day is meaningless there. It is a system built slightly wrong, a place where the fundamental rhythms of the universe are broken. This is the part of the story the original documentaries missed. They see a moon and a planet. They don't see the category panic that this system causes for our models of how solar systems form. We used to think that moons were simple leftovers, but the Pluto-Charon system suggests that moons can be partners, and that collisions don't always lead to destruction. Sometimes they lead to a kiss that locks 2 worlds together for eternity. As we look at the red stain on Charon's pole and the tumbling chaos of its guardians, we realize that Pluto is not a solitary figure. It is part of a complex, interconnected machine. The something strange happening on Pluto isn't just happening to the planet. It's a symptom of this binary relationship. The way the heart sits on the equator, the way the atmosphere behaves, the way the heat is preserved. It is all tied to the massive shadow of Charon hanging in the sky. We took away Pluto's title because we thought it was too small to be important. But in doing so, we ignored the fact that it has managed to do something no other planet has done. It has found a partner and built a kingdom of chaos in the most unlikely place in the universe. Pluto and Charon are a reminder that even at the edge of the map, there is intimacy. There is a connection that survives the freezing dark. And as we turn our gaze from this binary dance toward the thin, glowing ring of Pluto's atmosphere, we find that the exiled king has one more secret to tell us. A secret about how a world with no sun can still manage to breathe. But to understand the breath, you had to understand the heart. And to understand the heart, you had to understand the partner who watches over it, unmoving and eternal in the pitch-black sky. As the New Horizons spacecraft began its lonely departure, moving away from the exiled king and deeper into the frozen abyss of the Kuiper Belt, it did something unexpected. It turned its camera back for one final look. What it captured remains one of the most haunting and beautiful images in the history of space exploration. A perfect, delicate, glowing ring of electric blue light encircling a silhouette of pure, impenetrable black. In that moment, the world saw a version of Pluto that looked almost like Earth, a planet with a sky. But as the data began to stream back across the 4 billion mile void, scientists realized that this blue ring was not a sign of life or familiarity. It was a sign that something very strange is happening in the air of this distant world. We thought we were looking at a simple, thin layer of gas. Instead, we found a weird laboratory for planetary physics, a tenuous atmosphere that doesn't just sit there. It behaves like an active, self-regulating machine. The mystery begins with the color itself. On Earth, the sky's blue because of how sunlight scatters off oxygen and nitrogen molecules. But on Pluto, the blue isn't coming from the gas, it's coming from smog. High in the atmosphere, the faint ultraviolet light from the distant sun hits the frozen methane and nitrogen, triggering a complex chemical reaction. It creates a fine, soot-like haze of organic particles called tholins. These particles are tiny, barely larger than a grain of smoke, but they are the architects of Pluto's climate. They scatter the sunlight in such a specific way that they create that ghostly blue glow, a breathtaking moment of beauty that hides a much darker reality. For decades, the official planetary models predicted that Pluto's atmosphere should be relatively straightforward. We expected it to be a simple, expanding envelope of gas that would get warmer or colder depending on Pluto's distance from the Sun. But when New Horizons arrived, it found an atmosphere that was significantly colder and more compact than any of our pre-flyby models had anticipated. The experts were stunned. It was as if Pluto was refusing to follow the laws of physics we had written for it. This discrepancy caused a quiet category panic in the scientific community. If our models were this wrong about a simple atmosphere, what else were we missing about the way these distant worlds work? The answer arrived in 2025 thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope. A landmark study published in Nature Astronomy revealed the something strange that had been eluding us. The haze itself is the thermostat. In a discovery that redefines our understanding of planetary climates, researchers found that Pluto's atmospheric haze may play the controlling role in its heat balance. On most planets, the gas in the atmosphere determines the temperature. But on Pluto, the photochemical smog is the primary mechanism regulating how much heat the planet holds and how much it radiates back into the dark. Pluto isn't just a rock floating in space. It is a world that has developed a way to control its own internal environment, behaving more like a biological organism or a high-tech laboratory than a dead piece of debris. But the weird laboratory doesn't just keep its experiments in the sky. As these tholin particles grow heavier, they begin to drift downward, falling through the blue haze like a slow, eternal rain. Because the air is so thin and the gravity so weak, this rain doesn't fall in drops. It falls as a blood-red snow that coats the entire landscape in a layer of dark, organic dust. This is why the ice on Pluto isn't always white. This is why the mountains and the plains are stained with deep, unsettling hues of mahogany and crimson. If you were to stand on the surface of Pluto, you wouldn't just be standing on ice. You would be standing on the accumulated chemical waste of a billion-year-old atmospheric experiment. This discovery is what differentiates the real Pluto from the terrifying clickbait versions you see online. The original documentaries talk about the blue sky as a curiosity, but they miss the profound implication of the 2025 JWST results. The real story is that Pluto's atmosphere is unruly. It behaves in ways that are alien even by the standards of the other outer planets. It challenges our very definition of what a climate is. We used to think that the sun was the only thing that mattered for a planet's temperature. Pluto has shown us that, even in the deepest dark, a world can use its own pollution to carve out its own destiny. On Reddit and in deep lore communities, this atmospheric mystery is treated as the final proof that Pluto is an active machine. Once you realize that the sky is bleeding red snow to regulate its own heat, it becomes impossible to see Pluto as a frozen footnote. It moves from being a dead world to being a world that is still doing things in the present tense. This atmosphere is the breath of the exiled king, a thin but powerful layer of protection that allows the world beneath it to maintain its hot start and its hidden oceans. The something strange happening in the air of Pluto is a reminder that distance does not equal simplicity. We assumed that because Pluto was far away, its atmosphere would be a simple, frozen relic. Instead, we found a complex photochemical engine that is constantly churning and reacting. It is a world where the sky's blue because of the smog, the snow is red because of the sky, and the temperature is controlled by the soot. This is the true nature of Pluto's atmosphere. It is not just a delicate glowing ring, it is a shield, it is a laboratory, it is the evidence that the rules we built for Earth and Mars do not apply here at the edge of the map. Pluto's climate is a beautiful, freezing nightmare that refuses to be categorized. And as we look closer at how this atmosphere interacts with the surface, we begin to see the signs of something even more unsettling. Massive, jagged structures that suggest the exiled king has been active much more recently than we ever dared to imagine. But to understand the volcanoes of ice, you first had to understand the air that allowed them to exist. You had to understand that on Pluto, even the wind has a secret. Everything we know about planetary science tells us that small things die first. In the vast, freezing theatre of the solar system, size is destiny. If you're small and far from the sun, your internal fire is supposed to go out almost immediately. You're expected to become a frozen geological corpse within the first billion years of your life. But as we looked at the high-resolution maps of Pluto's southern edge, we found something that shouldn't be there. We found a structure that makes the hair on the back of a geologist's neck stand up. It's called Right Mons, and it is a 90-mile wide, 13,000-foot high mountain that is unlike anything else in the known universe. It isn't just a peak, it is a giant hummocky mass with a deep, unsettling depression at its summit. On Earth, we would call this a volcano, but on Pluto, there is no lava, there is no fire. There is only a world that has refused to die, and the something strange happening here is that Pluto seems to have stayed alive far too long. This is the fear of staying alive angle that the scientific community is quietly grappling with. When NASA mission scientists first saw Right Mons, the reaction wasn't just excitement, it was a form of category panic. If this is a volcano, it means that even now, 4.5 billion years after its birth, Pluto is still internally capable of resurfacing itself. To understand why this is so terrifying to our traditional models, you have to realize that a world as small as Pluto should have run out of energy eons ago. It should be as quiet as the moon, as inert as a pebble. Instead, we see evidence of cryovolcanism, eruptions of ammonia water slush that flow across the surface like thick, freezing blood. This isn't just interesting geology, it's a violation of the thermal death script we wrote for the outer solar system. Imagine standing at the base of Right Mons. The ground beneath you isn't rock, it's water ice that has been chilled to minus 390 degrees Fahrenheit, making it as hard as solid steel. But the mountain itself doesn't look like a mountain on Earth. It has a hummocky texture, a series of strange undulating mounds that look more like organic tissue than geological strata. This suggests that the mountain wasn't built by a single explosion, but by a series of slow, agonizing pulses of liquid from the interior. It is the planet's insulated pressure vessel, finally venting its ancient hot start heat into the vacuum. It is the physical manifestation of a world that is desperately clinging to the fire it was born with, refusing to let the darkness win. The unsettling implication is that if Right Mons is young, and the lack of craters on its flanks suggest it is, then Pluto is still doing things in the present tense. It means the exiled king is not a relic of the past, but a slow alien machine that is still running. In the deep lore communities on Reddit, this discovery triggered a wave of speculation that moves beyond the science and into the metaphysical. If Pluto can stay alive this long, what does that say about the billions of other objects in the Kuiper Belt? We used to think we were looking at a graveyard of frozen footnotes, but Right Mons suggests we are looking at a neighbourhood of hidden, active worlds that are simply moving on a different timeline than our own. But why does this cause fear among the experts? Because if Pluto stayed alive this long, it means our math is wrong. It means our understanding of how planets retain heat is missing a fundamental variable. Some argue that the secret lies in the methane clathrates, the specialized ice that acts as a cosmic thermal blanket, trapping the heat of the hot start deep within the core. Others point to the massive gravitational influence of Charon, suggesting that the binary dance creates enough tidal friction to keep the interior from solidifying. But no matter the cause, the result is the same, a world that has broken the dictionary. It is a world that is alive in a place where only death is supposed to exist. This cryovolcanic activity is the beating heart of the Pluto mystery. It connects the blood-red tholins falling from the sky to the hidden, liquid oceans that might be lurking beneath the crust. It suggests that the something strange we see on the surface is just the tip of the iceberg. If Right Mons is erupting, then the entire plumbing system of the planet is still active. There are conduits of liquid water and exotic chemical slushes moving through the interior, carving out caves and chambers in the dark. It is a world that is geologically unruly, a weird laboratory that is constantly testing the limits of what a planet is allowed to be. This is the part of the story that the viral, sensationalized videos often skip over. They focus on the horror of the cold, but the true horror is the warmth. The true mystery is the survival. Every time we find another hummocky mound or another crater-free plain, we are finding more evidence that the universe does not care about our classifications. We called Pluto a dwarf to make it feel small and finished, but Right Mons is a 13,000-foot tall monument to our own ignorance. It is a world that has outlived its own expiration date, and it is doing so with a geological violence that we are only just beginning to understand. As we look at the jagged, steel-hard peaks of these ice volcanoes, we have to admit that the exiled king has won the argument. He has proven that distance from the sun doesn't mean a lack of energy, and that small size doesn't mean a lack of complexity. Pluto is not what we thought it was because we assumed it was a fossil. We assumed it was a story whose ending had already been written. But as the blood-red snow continues to fall on the flanks of Right Mons, we realise that the most important chapters are still being lived. Pluto is a world that stayed alive too long, and in doing so, it has opened a door to a new kind of solar system, one where the darkness is full of hidden fires and the frozen worlds are the most active of all. The something strange is that we are no longer looking at a planet, we are looking at a survivor. And as we turn our attention from the fire of the volcanoes to the chaotic tumbling of the smaller moons, we realise that the entire system is haunted by this refusal to be quiet. The mechanics themselves are slightly off, the rhythms are unpredictable, and the guardians of the king are moving in a way that suggests the entire kingdom is in a state of permanent, active rebellion against the cold. But to understand the chaos of the moons, you first had to understand the impossible fire of the mountains. You had to understand that on Pluto, the greatest mystery isn't that it's cold, it's that it's still warm. If the relationship between Pluto and Charon is a display of perfect frozen discipline, then everything that surrounds them is a descent into absolute madness. We have spent so much time looking at the exiled king and his massive, unmoving partner that we almost missed the true horror of his kingdom. Orbiting this central binary pair are four tiny, jagged guardians, Nix, Hydra, Kerberos, and Styx. On any other planet, these would be simple, predictable satellites, following the rhythmic laws of gravity like clockwork. But Pluto is not a normal planet, and its kingdom does not follow the rules. These four moons are caught in a gravitational crossfire, so intense that they have lost the ability to behave like moons at all. They don't just orbit, they tumble. They spin wildly and unpredictably through the blackness, flipping over and over like shattered pieces of a forgotten collision. This is the chaos of the Guardians, and it is the clearest evidence we have that the entire Pluto system is mechanically haunted. To understand the something strange happening here, you have to imagine what it would be like to actually stand on the surface of a moon like Nix or Hydra. On Earth, we rely on the stability of the cosmos. We know that the sun will rise in the east and set in the west because our world spins on a stable, predictable axis. But on these chaotic moons, the concept of a day is a terrifying fiction, because the gravity of the central Pluto-Charon pair is constantly shifting, pulling at these tiny moons from two different directions at once. They can never find a stable rhythm. If you were standing on Nix, you might see the sun rise in the north one morning, only for it to vanish and reappear in the west an hour later. You would be living on a world that is essentially a cosmic gymnast, somersaulting through the void with no up and no down. It is a place where even the most basic laws of time and direction have been erased. This discovery, made by the Hubble Space Telescope before New Horizons even arrived, caused a massive wave of category panic in the rooms where planetary scientists work. We were taught that the solar system is a place of order, a grand, majestic machine where every gear turns in harmony. But the small moons of Pluto suggest that the machine is broken. They move in a shifting gravitational field that is so dynamically unstable, it feels rhythmically off, as if the mechanics themselves are slightly possessed. This isn't just a minor scientific detail, it's a narrative reversal that changes how we view the entire outer solar system. It suggests that the edge of our map is not just cold and slow, but fundamentally unpredictable and violent. When we look at these four guardians, we have to ask, where did they come from? The transcript of the successful videos often describes them as shattered pieces, but the lore vault suggests a much more unsettling origin. If the kiss and capture theory is true, if Pluto and Charon were once separate worlds that briefly collided and locked together, then these four moons are the scars of that encounter. They are the debris that was thrown into the dark when the two kings touched, caught forever in the chaotic wake of that ancient romance. They are the witnesses to a collision that shouldn't have happened, spinning in a permanent state of trauma. They are not just moons, they are the forensic evidence of a system that was built wrong from the very beginning. This is the something strange that the internet lore communities on Reddit and Discord can't leave alone. They don't just see rocks, they see a wounded category. They see a system where the exiled king is surrounded by a court of madmen. The fact that Nix, Hydra, Kerberos and Styx tumble suggests that the stability we feel on Earth is a rare privilege. Out here, in the deepest ocean of our solar system, the mechanics are haunted by a history of violence and a gravitational dance that refuses to settle down. It is a kingdom of glass mountains and toxic hearts, protected by four tumbling ghosts that refuse to let us look away. But there is a deeper, more technical mystery hiding in this chaos. Scientists have noted that despite the constant, violent tumbling, these moons have somehow managed to stay in their orbits for billions of years without crashing into each other or being flung out into the abyss. How does a system this unstable remain so durable? This is the paradox of the Pluto system. It is dynamically unstable, yet eternally locked. It is a world of contradictions that breaks every dictionary we try to apply to it. The chaos of the Guardians is the final proof that we cannot understand Pluto by using the rules of the inner planets. We have to accept that out here, on the false horizon of our knowledge, the very nature of reality is different. As you gaze at the tiny, flickering points of light that are Nix and Hydra, you realize that the exiled king is never truly alone. He is surrounded by a chaotic energy that reflects the unruly nature of his own atmosphere and the boiling heart of his surface. Everything about this system, from the floating mountains to the blood-red snow to the somersaulting moons, points to a single, inescapable truth. Pluto is not what we thought it was. It is a beautiful, freezing nightmare where the rules of physics are treated as mere suggestions. And the something strange that is happening is that we are finally beginning to see the system for what it is, a slow alien machine that is still running, still churning, and still refusing to be quiet. The Guardians are tumbling because the king is restless. They are the kinetic energy of a world that refused to stay dead. Every time Nix flips over in the dark, it is a reminder that the thermal death script we wrote for Pluto was a lie. We are looking at a system that is fundamentally, beautifully broken. And as we move from the chaos of the moons to the final, most controversial part of the Pluto story, we have to confront the category panic that started it all. We have to ask why this tiny world has the power to break our definitions and force us to rewrite the map of the entire universe. Because the something strange on Pluto isn't just a geological mystery, it's a challenge to our very identity as explorers. If we were so wrong about a dwarf planet, what else are we missing in the blackness between the stars? In the summer of 2006, inside a crowded assembly hall in Prague, a group of 424 astronomers did something that would spark one of the most intense cultural and scientific wars of the 21st century. With a show of hands, they effectively erased a world. They drafted a new definition of what a planet is, and in doing so, they cast Pluto into the darkness, labeling it a dwarf and a piece of dead floating debris. We were told this was a necessary correction, a way to clean up the messy maps of our solar system and bring order to the cosmos. But while the humans on Earth were busy checking boxes and arguing over definitions, the exiled king was waiting in the shadows with a secret. When the New Horizons mission finally arrived in 2015, it didn't just find a world, it found a scientific catastrophe for the people who had demoted it. Pluto returned to our consciousness not as a tiny footnote, but as the planet that broke the dictionary. This is the chapter of the story where the science meets a phenomenon known as category panic. It is a term used by researchers to describe the moment when reality becomes too strange to fit inside the words we built to contain it. For 76 years, Pluto was the 9th planet, the underdog at the edge of the map. But the discovery of other objects in the Kuiper Belt, like Eris, forced the International Astronomical Union to create a strict 3-part test for planethood. To be a planet, an object must orbit the Sun. It must be round, and it must have cleared the neighbourhood of its orbit. Pluto passed the first 2 with ease, but because it shares its neighbourhood with a sea of other icy bodies, it was stripped of its title. We thought that by changing the label, we were making the solar system easier to understand. We assumed that a dwarf planet would be a simple, frozen relic, a small quiet rock that didn't do much. We were fundamentally wrong. The irony of the 2006 demotion is that we threw Pluto away before we even saw its face. When the first high-resolution images from New Horizons finally streamed back across the 4 billion-mile void, they didn't show a dead, cratered ball of ice. They showed a world that was more geologically active, more chemically complex, and more climatically unruly than many of the officially recognized planets. Scientists found nitrogen glaciers that boil like thick soup, mountains of solid water ice that float like icebergs, and a blue atmosphere regulated by alien smog. The exiled king didn't just come back, he came back carrying proof that our definitions were provincial and small. This is what drives the deep lore communities on Reddit and Discord, the sense that humanity made a mistake, not just in a label, but in its understanding of what makes a world alive. On social platforms, the debate over Pluto's planethood has mutated into something much deeper than a semantic argument. It has become an emotional topology, a map of how we project our own feelings of exile and identity onto a distant rock. For millions of people, Pluto is a symbol of the outsider, the one who was cast out but proved to be more extraordinary than the official members of the club. This is why the title of planet is still defended so fiercely in the comments sections of NASA posts and space forums. It isn't just about the science, it's about the refusal to let a frozen footnote be forgotten. Every discovery of a new, strange behaviour, from the blood-red snow falling on Reitmons to the kiss and capture romance with Karen, is used as evidence in a cosmic courtroom. The public doesn't just ask what Pluto is, they argue that our categories are inadequate to contain its reality. This category panic is also happening inside the scientific community, though the language is more refined. There is a fundamental conflict between 2 ways of looking at the universe. On one side is the dynamical definition used by the IAU, which cares about where a world is and what it has cleared from its path. On the other side is the geophysical definition, championed by mission scientists like Alan Stern, which argues that if an object is round and has complex geology, it is a planet, regardless of its neighbourhood. Pluto is the ultimate antagonist in this conflict. It is a world that behaves like a planet, but lives like a dwarf. It has a complex atmosphere, a system of 5 moons, an active geological cycle, and potentially a hidden liquid ocean, features that some real planets like Mercury completely lack. By labelling Pluto a dwarf, we tried to simplify the map, but Pluto responded by showing us that the map is far more terrifying and diverse than we ever imagined. The something strange happening on Pluto isn't just geological, it's the fact that it is a world that refuses to be categorized. It has changed our perspective from seeing the outer solar system as a graveyard of leftovers to seeing it as a frontier of active, ocean-bearing worlds. Pluto is the gateway drug to a much larger, more destabilizing idea that the most interesting things in the universe might be happening in the places we've already written off as dead. As we look at the giant pale heart of Sputnik Planitia, we have to realize that the crime scene isn't just on the surface of Pluto, it's in our own textbooks. We built a dictionary to sort the universe into neat little boxes, and Pluto was the first thing to break those boxes apart. It is a beautiful, freezing nightmare that reminds us that reality does not care about our validation. The exiled king remains the undisputed ruler of the Kuiper Belt, not because of a vote in a hall in Prague, but because it continues its silent, active dance in the dark, long after our own definitions have failed. We thought we were the ones who decided what a planet was, but Pluto has shown us that the universe is the one in charge. And as we move into the final mysteries of this system, we have to accept that the most terrifying thing about Pluto isn't the cold or the poison. It's the fact that it was right all along. While we've spent our time looking through the cold lens of telescopes and the clinical data of space probes, there is another Pluto being built back here on Earth. It isn't made of nitrogen ice or frozen methane, but of data, obsession, and a deep-seated human need for a hero. As the New Horizons spacecraft began its long journey away from the planet, the story didn't end. It simply migrated from the vacuum of space to the servers of the internet. We have entered the era of the internet's Pluto, a place where the line between hard science and modern myth has become permanently blurred. This is where the real something strange is happening. Every time a scientist discovers a new piece of evidence, a floating mountain, a red-stained pole, or a boiling heart, it is immediately metabolized by a global community of observers who are hungry for something more than just geology. We aren't just looking at a rock at the end of the map, we're looking at the machine that manufactures mystery around a real scientific puzzle. On platforms like Reddit, Pluto has become more than a dwarf planet. It is an emotional topology. In these digital spaces, the richest non-academic lore lives in plain sight, fueled by a phenomenon known as category panic. This isn't just a debate about whether Pluto should be a planet again. It is a collective refusal to let a frozen footnote be forgotten. For millions of users, the 2006 demotion was not a scientific correction, but a betrayal of the ultimate underdog. This narrative of the exile who came back with evidence has turned Pluto into a symbol of hidden power and resilience. When NASA releases a new image of the blood-red snow falling on the flanks of ripe Mons, the internet doesn't just see organic compounds. It sees a world that is bleeding in protest against its exile. The science is real, but for the people watching from home, the truth already behaves like myth. This is where the myth versus machine conflict becomes truly productive for our understanding of the solar system. On one side, you have the machine, the cold clinical process of planetary science that looks at the splat theory, or the convection cells of Sputnik Planitia, and sees a series of interesting physical problems to be solved. On the other side, you have the myth, the internet communities that take these same facts and inflate them into something metaphysical. If the science says there might be a subsurface ocean, the myth says there is something swimming in the dark. If the science says Pluto and Charon kissed and captured each other, the myth says it is a cosmic romance written in the stars. This feedback loop is what makes Pluto the most dangerous world in the solar system for our traditional definitions. It is a wounded category that people pour their own stories into, using the real scientific surprises as the foundation for an entirely new kind of folklore. But why does Pluto attract this level of projection when larger, closer worlds, like Neptune or Uranus, do not? The answer lies in the something strange that we've been discussing all along. Pluto is just active enough to be provocative. It is just far enough away to be mysterious. And it is just broken enough by our own classifications to feel like it belongs to us. In the occult and fringe spaces of Facebook and Discord, Pluto is even framed as a harbinger of civilizational change, a lost planet that holds the key to our own future. While the science tells us about the hot start and the insulated pressure vessel, the internet lore turns those concepts into a narrative about a world that refused the thermal death script we wrote for it. It is the planet that stayed alive too long, and in doing so, it became the perfect canvas for our own fears of being small and forgotten. This emotional topology is what keeps the Pluto story alive long after the New Horizons mission has passed. It is why we can't stop talking about the heart. Every time a simulation study like the 2024 splat theory is published, it doesn't just stay in the academic journals. It becomes catnip for long-form storytelling, sparking thousands of arguments over whether the heart is a crime scene, a reorientation engine, or evidence for a hidden abyss. The authorities themselves, people like Alan Stern and the mission scientists at NASA, often sound surprised by what they find, and that surprise is the fuel that keeps the internet's mystery machine running. They aren't panicked, but they are repeatedly forced to admit that Pluto keeps producing more explanatory branches than a single flyby should have allowed. This is the central paradox of the modern Pluto. We have more data than ever before, but the world feels more mysterious than it did when it was just a blurry pixel in a telescope. We solved the question of what the surface looks like, but in doing so, we created a dozen more questions about what is happening underneath the ice. The category panic hasn't subsided, it has only evolved. We are now forced to reckon with a world that behaves like a planet, breathes like a laboratory, and loves like a partner. It is a world that broke the dictionary, and in the fragments of that broken book, the internet has built a cathedral of lore. As we move toward the final horizon of our story, we have to realize that the internet's Pluto is not a distraction from the science. It is a cultural artifact that reveals how humans react when we encounter something that is truly, deeply other. We look at the tumbling moons of Nix and Hydra and see a mechanically haunted system. We look at the blood-red stain of Mordor macula on Charon and see a shared bleeding atmosphere. These are not just scientific observations. They are the ingredients for a new kind of cosmic myth. Pluto is the gateway drug to a bigger, more destabilizing idea that the universe is not the orderly, clockwork machine we were promised in school. It is a place of chaos, of unruly atmospheres, and of tiny exiled kings who refuse to stay dead. The something strange is not just the nitrogen ice or the floating mountains. The something strange is us. It is the fact that we can't look at this distant, freezing rock without seeing ourselves. We see our own exile, our own resilience, and our own refusal to fit into the boxes that others build for us. Pluto is not what we thought it was because we were looking for a planet, and we found a mirror. And as we turn our gaze one last time toward the false horizon at the edge of the map, we realize that the most important thing Pluto ever did wasn't to prove it was a planet. It was to prove that we are still capable of being astonished. The myth and the machine have finally become one, and the resulting story is far more terrifying and beautiful than anything we could have imagined in 2006. As we leave the system of the exiled king behind, we are forced to confront the most unsettling realization of all. Pluto is not the end of the map. For nearly a century, our textbooks taught us that Pluto was the final sentinel, the last lonely rock before the sun's influence faded into the infinite black. We called it a dwarf because we wanted it to be small, manageable, and finished. We wanted the story of the solar system to have a neat, quiet ending. But as we look back at that delicate blue ring of atmosphere and that massive beating heart of nitrogen, we realize that Pluto was never the destination. It was the threshold. We are standing on what researchers now call the false horizon. Everything we've discovered about Pluto, the boiling glaciers, the floating mountains, the shared bleeding atmosphere, is just a gateway drug to a much bigger, more destabilizing truth. If a tiny world 4 billion miles away can be this active, this complex, and this strange, then we haven't reached the end of our neighborhood at all. We are only just beginning to see the scale of what we've ignored. This is the expansion energy of the Pluto story. Every time we solve a mystery on its surface, we create a more profound question about the space beyond it. We used to think the outer solar system was a graveyard of frozen relics, a place where time and geology went to die. But Pluto has detonated that model forever. If Pluto can preserve an ancient, liquid ocean beneath its crust using nothing but a hot start and a thermal blanket of methane ice, then the entire Kuiper Belt might be a neighborhood of hidden, liquid interiors. Beyond Pluto, in the pitch-black abyss, there are thousands of other worlds, like Eris, Sedna and Gongong, objects we once dismissed as boring pieces of ice. But in the light of what we found at Pluto, those names now sound like a list of unexplored frontiers. We are no longer looking at a desert of debris. We are looking at a vast, dark ocean of potential activity. This realization is the ultimate source of the category panic that has haunted our scientific institutions since 2006. We didn't just get Pluto's label wrong, we got the entire nature of the universe wrong. We built our definitions of planets and life based on the warm, sunny rocks of the inner solar system, assuming that distance from the sun meant a lack of energy and interest. Pluto has shown us that the habitable zone is not a narrow ring around a star, but a state of being that can exist anywhere. There is enough insulation and a violent enough birth. The something strange happening on Pluto isn't a localized anomaly. It's a symptom of a solar system that is far more vibrant and mechanically haunted than we ever dared to imagine. We are looking at a system where small moons tumble in chaos and atmospheres are regulated by alien smog, suggesting that the rules of physics behave differently at the edge of the map. This is the moral irony of the exiled king. Humanity cast him out because he didn't fit our provincial definitions, only for him to return with evidence that our definitions were too small to contain the reality of the cosmos. Pluto did not merely get upgraded from an interesting dwarf to a slightly more interesting dwarf. It changed categories entirely, from a frozen footnote to the most dangerous world in the solar system for our traditional understanding of reality. It is the antagonist to our dictionaries, a world that refuses to be quiet and refuses to stay dead. The truth about Pluto already behaves like myth because it challenges our identity as explorers. It forces us to admit that we were wrong about the very basics of what makes a world alive. As the silhouette of Pluto fades into the dark, we have to accept that the most terrifying thing about this world isn't the cold, the poison, or the blood-red snow. It's the fact that Pluto is the first sign that we are living in a solar system of hidden oceans. It is the scout for a hidden empire of active worlds that we've ignored for 100 years. We looked at a dwarf and saw a relic, but the universe looked back and showed us a survivor. The exiled king remains the undisputed ruler of the Kuiper Belt, not because we give him a title, but because he is the one who opened the door to the abyss and showed us what was waiting there. The story of Pluto is the story of our own curiosity being tested by the dark. It is a reminder that in every layer of inquiry, the scale of the mystery only grows. We solved the question of the heart only to find the question of the ocean. We solved the question of the sky only to find the question of the smog. This is why the internet's emotional topology refuses to let Pluto go, because we see our own resilience in its refusal to be a fossil. We are all outcasts in a vast, dark universe, trying to keep our own internal fires burning against the cold. And if a tiny rock at the edge of everything can do it for 4 billion years, maybe we can too. The false horizon is finally behind us. We are moving into a future where Pluto is no longer the end of the map, but the beginning of a new era of exploration. We are looking for the hidden fires of Eris, the chaotic moons of Sedna, and the liquid hearts of 1,000 unnamed worlds. Pluto was the first world to break the dictionary, but it won't be the last. As we push further into the deepest ocean of our solar system, we have to carry the lessons of the exiled king with us. That distance does not equal simplicity. That small does not mean silent, and that the universe is always far more unruly and beautiful than our words can describe. Pluto is not what we thought it was. It is a world that has outlived its own expiration date, a planet that kisses its partner in the dark, and a gateway to a wider, stranger unknown. Something strange is indeed happening, but it isn't just happening on Pluto. It is happening to our understanding of the entire universe. We set out to find a dead rock, and instead, we found ourselves standing at the beginning of a grand, cosmic mystery that will outlast our own sun. The exiled king has spoken, and the message is clear. The solar system is alive, it is active, and it is waiting for us to stop worrying about the labels and start looking at the truth. Stay curious, because the horizon you think you see is only the first step into a much larger, more terrifying beauty.